You're listening to a podcast of Information is the Best Medicine with Glenn Ellis. Saturdays at 9 a.m. exclusively on WURD Radio. 96.1 FM and 900 AM WURD.
This is Information is the Best Medicine with your host, Glenn Ellis. This program is committed to helping you make good decisions about your health and the health of those you love. And now, here's your host, Glenn Ellis.
Hi, everybody. How are you today? I'm Glenn Ellis, and thanks so much for joining us again. We appreciate you all, every single one of you. And as always, we bring you information that's going to help you live the best life possible. Sometimes it's medical information, sometimes it's wellness information, and sometimes it's social information. Either way, information is the best medicine. You know, where people live, work, and play has an impact on their health. And, you know, this gentrification thing is a very hot topic, and it's defined as transforming neighborhoods from low value to high value. And longtime residents of those neighborhoods face financial distress. They find themselves with loss of community services, overcrowded, substandard housing conditions, and studies indicate that they become more vulnerable to things that cause them to have shorter life expectancies, higher cancer rates, more birth defects, greater infant mortality, and a higher incidence of asthma, diabetes, and heart disease. In addition, there's evidence that shows that these populations have an unequal share of residential exposure to hazardous waste such as lead. And we all know about that story. Now, while much of this discussion about gentrification is focusing on how to homogenize and how it creates racial tensions and property values and all those kinds of things, what's happening to those people who are pushed out or marginalized within their original communities? That's what we're finding is the real question that needs to be answered. Now, in his latest book, The New Urban Crisis, Dr. Richard Florida, who's one of the world's leading urbanists, and we'll explain that a little later, he says that the Back to the City movement that was ushered in by the young, educated, affluent, and white population has resulted in a winner-take-all kind of urbanism. And it has a small group of winners, and as many of us know, a large group of losers. Now, for everybody out there listening to this program today, wherever you are on 5 different continents around the world, in 27 states within these United States of America, and in 16 different countries, 17 actually, because California is a separate country, so I can't call it a state, actually. But anyway, today we're going to learn, based on the book that Dr. Florida has written, we're going to learn about this new urban crisis, how our cities are increasing inequality, deepening segregation, and failing the middle class, and what we can do about it. Now it's time for you to call somebody whose health and well-being you care about, because I'm Glenn Ellis. Dr. Richard Florida is here with us, and as always, our ancestors are listening, because information is the best medicine. And we are ready to go. We're back, and time to get started. As I mentioned this morning, we're grateful and fortunate. We have a man who is considered one of the world's leading urbanists. Now, that's a term that most of us can't go home and say, Mom, what's an urbanist? So anyway, he's going to explain that to us. But his name is Dr. Richard Florida, and he's a researcher and a professor. Right now he's at the University of Toronto, where he's a university professor, director of cities. He's a distinguished fellow also at New York University's Schack Institute of Real Estate, and a visiting fellow at Florida International University. Now, he's a writer and a journalist, and he's written several great best-selling books, and his work is very well respected around. However, today we have him here to really look at something that he just recently published. His latest book is called The New Urban Crisis, and the subtitle is How Our Cities Are Increasing Inequality, Deepening Segregation, and Failing the Middle Class, and What We Can Do About It. So Dr. Richard Florida is here with us, and good morning to you, sir. How are you?
It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure, trust me, and I'm sure as this program goes on, you'll realize we're getting the best end of this deal.
Thank you. It's very kind.
So can you begin by helping us to become a little smarter so we can go around and know what it means when people say, I'm an urbanist? What is an urbanist?
Well, an urbanist means I study cities and I study urban areas. And, you know, as I tell the story in my book, I was born in 1957 in Newark, New Jersey. And I saw that city as a young boy explode into riots. I saw the streets burn. In fact, I was driving with my father one day he was taking me, he wanted me to learn. I wanted to play guitar, but he wanted me to actually take a lesson. And the shots rang out, and I I heard the shots, and he made me get down on the floor of his old Chevy. And the people said, and I saw tanks in the street and armored vehicles. And I think I wanted to understand what caused the city to explode. I was very affected by, obviously, the civil rights movement, the student movement, the women's movement of the 1960s, and all of that seemed to be about our cities. And then I watched my city, Newark, hollow out. I saw jobs and people move to the suburbs and poverty become concentrated. And so when I went off to college, I got a scholarship to study at Rutgers College in New Jersey. After I messed around with a couple of other subjects like pre-med and decided I didn't like it, I really decided that I wanted to devote my life to studying why cities decline. And then fortunately, I can't believe it, but fortunately over the course of my life, we've seen cities come back. So that's what an urbanist does. It's somebody who studies cities and urban areas, and they're both their opportunities and their challenges. And
so let me kind of ease into our conversation about your current book about the new urban crisis. In preparing for the opportunity to speak with you on this program, in looking back at a lot of the work you've written, and at one point you were really I want to say that not the poster child, but kind of like you were the drum major for urbanizing cities with what we kind of, I guess, loosely refer to as gentrifying, a lot of the major cities by helping to encourage and advise a lot of the city governments and municipalities on how to develop cities in a way to attract younger, more educated, more affluent people who could help to kind of grow the economy, so to speak. Is that an accurate assessment?
No, I think so. And I think growing up in Newark and seeing a city decline, and then I went to study in New York City, and I saw New York City start to come back with the artists, and the creative people and the musicians. And I think I was very excited about the possibility for people to rebuild cities. And remember, for most of my life, the people and jobs were moving out of cities. So I was very excited to see these younger people, more educated people, what I called, in my book in 2002, the creative class. Artists, musicians, designers, techies, knowledge professionals moving back to cities. But I think, in truth, Glenn, I underpredicted how severe, how big this movement back to the cities would be. I saw a trickle, and I said it could be more, and I identified who was going back to the cities, and it wasn't the suburbanite, it was young people, it was gay people, it was people from diverse backgrounds, it was immigrants, it was also middle-class African Americans, maybe people without kids or without a lot of kids. So I was very excited by it, but it took a while for me to really to see that what was happening is, as this urban revival, which I think is a good thing. I mean, I think it's great that cities come back and people have the opportunity to live in big, vibrant, diverse, exciting cities. What was happening is because there wasn't enough land and there wasn't enough housing, the movement in of some groups was pushing other groups out. And the statistic I quote in my book, it's rough, but it's the top 10% of income earners that moved into cities, and the bottom 10% of our income earners that were pushed out of cities. And I think that's what really, and then of course, seeing this election and Trump come into office, I think understanding that was a backlash. It was a backlash because we are so geographically unequal, and certain parts of our country are thriving, and other parts of our country are falling behind. And there are people in our country who are just angrier and angrier and lashing out. So I think those are the things that caused me to really look at this new urban crisis, which I define very simply the same clustering of people and ideas and knowledge and talent and industry that drive economic growth in our cities, that same clustering creates this divides, the very divides in our society that push us apart and break us apart. So I think that those are the things that moved me and caused me to write this new book.
Let me just quickly reintroduce you for those who may just be tuning in and missed that great introduction. This is Dr. Richard Florida, and he's joining us today on Information is the Best Medicine. He's really going to help us to get a great overview about this work he's done with this new book, The New Urban Crisis, about how our cities are increasing inequality, deepening segregation, and failing the middle class, and what we can do about it. So, Dr. Florida, can we look at each of those little buckets, so to speak: inequality, deepening segregation, and failing middle class? And can you just kind of like touch on each of those and how this urban crisis links to each of those particular areas?
Yeah, well, I think.
Or are they separate? I guess I should.
No. It's good. I think they're all of a piece. What we know is that inequality is not just something that occurs between classes or between races. It's something that occurs between places. And I think what my book tries to say is this inequality between places, this geographic inequality or segregation, is as serious or more serious than other kinds of inequality. So just a couple of quick facts for folks listening in. Inequality, both income inequality and wage inequality, grow and get worse. The larger, the denser, the more knowledge-based and the more innovative a metropolitan area or city is. So the better its economy is doing, and the more it's driving job growth, and the more it's driving innovation, the more unequal it becomes. The same thing is true with economic segregation. If you look at the segregation of people by income or by education, people who didn't graduate high school versus those who graduated college, or by job, people who do knowledge work and professional work versus people who do blue-collar work either in a factory or in a service job like food prep or retail or office work or caring jobs. That segregation gets worse. The bigger a metro gets, the denser a metro gets, the more educated a metro gets, the more knowledge-based and the more innovative. And then finally, which I think is the real nub of the urban crisis, if the old urban crisis was about the middle class fleeing the city and moving to the suburbs, which was horrible and bad enough, the new urban crisis is about really the evisceration of the middle class and of middle-class neighborhoods in our society. And the statistic I use in the book is so distressing to me. In 1970, two-thirds of Americans lived in middle-class neighborhoods, whether they be in urban centers like Newark or New York City or Detroit or suburban areas. Today, less than 40% of us do. The middle class, which is the bedrock of the American dream, has declined in 203 of 229 metros for which people have collected data. I mean, that is, and the middle class decline has been biggest where? In the most largest, the densest, and the most vibrant of our cities and metro areas. So I think that's the nub of the urban crisis, that in a way, what's such a great dichotomy or dilemma, the more successful our cities become, the more they grow, the more they add jobs and knowledge and innovation, the more divided they become, and the smaller their middle class becomes, and we just fracture into a class-divided society.
This is, and it's so disturbing, and fortunately, I guess in many ways, I travel a lot, and so I visit. I'm in a lot of. I just came back from Southern California, from the LA area, and I'm in Detroit and Chicago and San Francisco and Boston and blah blah blah, and I'm based here in Philadelphia, and so it's really disturbing, quite candidly, Dr. Florida, when I look at the degree of both segregation and exclusion that is resulted from a lot of this influx and this thriving of these creative classes, and this program being directed at particularly to try to help to empower people on improving the quality of life and their health and their well-being, and from medical points of view, I just see the direct connecting of the dots with that sort of thing. And so when I look at right now, and if I can use Philadelphia as an example, how we have such a great world-class medical system here in Philadelphia in terms of the hospital, University of Pennsylvania and Thomas Jefferson, and these are world-class places like what's the name? Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, top in the world, and yet we got highest infant mortality rates. We got a HIV/AIDS rate 5 times the national average for blacks. And so you start and you look at the public educational system, which is, I don't even know how you can still call it an educational system. It's a housing complex, basically a daycare center for kids up through teenage. So I'm just saying, but yet we've got some of the top universities. It's a city of eds and meds, but yet, it's like a tale of two cities. It's Charles Dickens all over again.
I think that's why I wrote this book, and I think...
And that's why I have you on the program.
I think it has gotten considerably worse. I mean, to a person, people say what's happened in the past 10 years is disturbing to a degree that, and I think that's why people are resonating with this book and the message that I want to put forward of inclusive prosperity. But let's dig into what you said. So it's not just class and geographic segregation. It's all of this is overlaid by race, as you've rightly said. One of the striking statistics that I say in the book is when you look at gentrification, it's typically old industrial neighborhoods or white working class neighborhoods that gentrify. Now, we can all come to an example of Harlem or Bedford-Stuyvesant. When a neighborhood is 40 or 45% black, it tends to stay in concentrated and extreme poverty. I mean, to me, that is probably the most distressing finding that I report in the book, that this overlay of race and class and neighborhood has generated a concentrated and extreme poverty in our society, which is a tale of two cities, a white, middle-class, professional city where people have access to private goods, private schools, private whatever, and a sinking minority in black city. So we look in the book at research on racially concentrated poverty. I mean, racially concentrated poverty at these two extremes has grown, and then you factor in the horrific white backlash from Trump. Don't even get me started on the racism there. But I think you're right. Now, one thing that I think is a good sign, and I don't want to say this is a perfect sign. I did a book event in Philadelphia, and I got on the stage in downtown Philadelphia in the theater with the head of Drexel, and a big dean of Thomas Jefferson was there, and the head of the City Science Center, and they said to me, not me said to them, we in the meds and eds community, we wanted to drive growth. We wanted to make our city better. We are part of the problem. I mean, the heads of these institutions said to me, we are part of the problem. Now we need to go about fixing it. And the way to fix it is not to be at war with one another, but that's the word I used, inclusive prosperity, to work together to extend the benefits of our urban revitalization to neighborhoods and community groups, which all are all around our areas of prosperity. So I think that there's a moment in America, and I really do believe, Glenn, part of this is people are just so scared of what Trump represents. I think it's not me writing, it's Americans of all stripes, except for the true believers in Trump, have said we can't have this in our society, this divide. I think that was the wake-up call. So I do think our cities and those institutions that you said, those leader institutions, the eds and meds, are ready to look at how they can have been part of the problem and how they can be part of the solution. And I want to say this, though. This isn't an easy fix. These problems of inequality and segregation and a declining middle class and concentrated poverty are big, deep, hard problems. But what I'm finding as I go around the country, and even in your town of Philadelphia, for the first time there's a willingness to recognize that they exist and begin the hard part of trying to work to solve them.
I would really like to believe that, but as the historical experience says,
yep.
How can you believe that? Tell me. I mean, where's some type of evidence that shows that there's some action that matches their words?
Well, I think
you understand the point, right?
Yeah. I think you've got to try to make society better, and I think you've nailed the problem in the United States. It is a society which has been too long divided by race, by class, and geography. And look, we got two ways we can go now. We can go the way of Trump and a divided, disastrous, dysfunctional society, or we can try to put this thing back together. And, I'm going to do everything in my power to work with mayors because, I honestly don't think the federal government really gets it, but I do think we could find mayors around this country who get it and want to work on these problems. But you're right. The history to this point, and the history of suburbanization was worse. I guess what gives me a little optimism, Glenn, is when I look at a city, whether that's New York or Philadelphia or LA, where you said you've been to Detroit, I see diversity. I see affluence and poverty. I see black and white, Hispanic and Asian. I see straight and gay families and singles. A city is not like a gated suburb. So my hope is that the politics of this, the contestation of this, the diversity of viewpoints will get through to mayors like de Blasio, get through to mayors like Sadiq Khan in London, get through to mayors like Anne Hidalgo in Paris, get through to mayors like Eric Garcetti in L.A. But this ain't going to be an easy struggle. This is part of the long, hard struggle in the United States. And I would echo your point. Things look bleaker, rather than more uplifting at this moment.
And there was a report that just was released today or yesterday. Yesterday or today, I forget which. I'm losing my days, but anyway, 63 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, our public school systems around the country, and particularly in the major cities, are as, if not more, segregated than they were in 1954. So when we talk about, now we've seen the growth that has resulted from the creative class, coming into being, and yet institutions like public education have not kind of moved along with it, because along with the creative class comes private schools and private education. So that takes the eye off of the ball for there to be some type of inclusive prosperity. And so, unless I'm wrong, Dr. Florida, I just don't see how we can kind of turn this Titanic and make a sharp left turn without somebody having to say, I've got to accept that I have to relinquish some of the privileges I enjoy in order to make this thing possible so that there's an inclusive. And I'm not trying to...
I totally agree with you. I don't disagree.
Yeah, I just don't see how we can do it. But I want to take a quick... a very brief break so that we can come back, and I want to continue our conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Information is the Best Medicine. Need I say more? Because Dr. Richard Florida is here to emphasize the point. We're talking about his latest book and the information in it, The New Urban Crisis, How Our Cities Are Increasing Inequality, Deepening Segregation, and Failing the Middle Class, and what we can do about it. We're going to come back and continue this conversation.
You're listening to Information is the Best Medicine with Glenn Ellis. We'll be right back.
Without a ghetto around. In every city you find the same thing going down. Harlem is the capital of every ghetto town.
You're listening to WURD Radio, 96.1 FM and 900 AM WURD, independent black media.
Now let's get back to more good health talk with Glenn Ellis and his guest on Information is the Best Medicine.
And we're back, and we're going to continue our conversation. As I mentioned, our guest today is Dr. Richard Florida, who's joining us, and he's considered one of the world's leading urbanists, and he studies urban environments. He's a researcher, a professor, a writer, a journalist. He's written several great and well-received and acclaimed award-winning books, including The Rise of the Creative Class. And his most recent book is called The New Urban Crisis, which was just released in April of this year. And I do want to mention he's a senior editor for The Atlantic, one of my favorite publications, I must add. And one of my dear friends was able to be among the contributing writers there over the last year or so. Rod McCullum, I just had to say that. Anyway, Doc, so we were kind of going into a nice little space here to really try to illuminate this whole issue, to really try to figure out what we can do about this stuff. And I was trying to just share, from my perspective, I'm just trying to see where are the indications. I do want to share this quickly. I was a freshman at the University of Penn in 1971. And I remember seeing I was taking a city planning class, and I had to go in the building often, and there was always this scale model in the lobby of that building, and it was a city, then it said University City. And at the time, that model was totally unbelievable and unrealistic based on what they were saying it was going to be. And now today, it clearly is University City. And so I just look at how over this last 35, 40 years or whatever it's been, that whole part of West Philadelphia, rarely do people even refer to it as West Philadelphia now. It's University City. And so, but it's a city that's been developed. It's a great economy. Obviously, the institutions, the educational institutions, the healthcare and medical facilities. But who's it for? And so when I go through those kind of places, and I'm downtown Philadelphia and over around the St. Joseph University area, and even to the large extent the Temple University area, it's like you walk around there and you have to like convince yourself that, wait a minute, this city is 50% black. But there's nothing to reflect that in this growth. So I'm just trying to say, how do we stop this train? You know, can we is there like an emergency brake, or what can we do? Because it's like this engine, because it's just an economic engine now.
Well, I think the emergency brake, if anything, was the backlash of Trump and seeing blatant racism in our society and seeing how that threatens, Trump is threatening immigrants. He's threatening urban areas. He's threatening cities. He's threatening the blue part of America, if you will, white, black, Hispanic, Latino. I think that was the emergency brake that was thrown, to be honest. But going back to your point, my mom and dad both grew up in Newark. My mother, growing up in the 30s and 40s, went to a completely integrated public school where black and white kids went to the same classes, went to the same dances, had friendships. Think about this. In 1930s and 40s, she told me this all the time. I think the big point that was the suburbanization, where you develop these exclusive, gated, if you will, majority white, and the city fell further and further behind, and you got concentrated minority poverty. So what was the response to that? And it was a boneheaded response. We're going to create these gated university areas where the students and the faculty could be protected. It's disgusting. I wrote against it at the time. I wrote against it in Pittsburgh when I taught at Carnegie Mellon. I said trying to erect a moat was a problem. But now I think, in Philadelphia particularly, because I've been talking to people in your city, that there is a recognition that this model is not working. That, in fact, I think that there's been attempts over the years to open up parts of West Philadelphia and to be more inclusive than other places. I'm not saying perfect, to take down the walls. But I think now is what we call the tipping point, where we're going to see, where the rubber meets the road. And it really means, I think, Glenn, to be quite honest, and folks listening in, that we have to put pressure on these anchor institutions. The medical institutions, the educational institutions, the big real estate developers that want to put up luxury developments or business developments, and say, look, this has to be part of an inclusive strategy. It can't just be a part of enriching your part or a part of a little quarter of the city. It has to include the neighborhoods. When I lived in Pittsburgh, we made it work in East Liberty. We developed a strategy to include the neighborhoods in the, upgrading of that, jobs for neighborhood residents, jobs in Whole Foods, jobs in Home Depot. It can be done, but it's going to take a lot of local effort, and it's going to take a lot of pushing and prodding. But I hope. I mean, if we can't, what's the alternative? If we can't turn this corner, things look really, really bleak and horrifying to me.
Well, Dr. Florida, and by the way, let me just, once again, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Richard Florida is my guest today, and he is a university professor and a director of cities at the Martin Prosperity Institute at the University of Toronto, a distinguished fellow at NYU Sachs Institute of Real Estate, and a visiting fellow at Florida International. He also serves as senior editor for The Atlantic, where he co-founded and serves as editor-at-large for City Lab. Dr. Florida, so, you said we have to put the pressure on the institutions, and I like your advice to a guy like me. How do I make a change, somebody like me make a change or increase that pressure that you indicate without, is there any way, let me rephrase, is there any way to avoid, because I do it anyway, but I'm constantly like some angry black guy who's like trying to play the race card or a troublemaker, or, it's like, it's easy, and I know I'm being dismissed, and that's the easiest way to do and not have to deal with and confront some of the real realities. But I think that's one, from my side of the fence, that's one of the biggest obstacles, is because it's so easy to be dismissed when you're trying to bring issues that speak to equity and equality and shared prosperity, people don't want to hear that.
So my message is an attempt at this, and it's being well received by mayors, by city leaders, by university heads. And I think to marry the message about equity with a message of prosperity and innovation and growth, and say, look, we're not going to say you can't have your innovation and your growth, but if you want to grow Philadelphia, if you want to grow San Francisco, if you want to grow LA, it ain't going to grow anymore on your exclusive gated strategy. It is only going to grow because the political backlash to that is too horrifying. It's only going to grow by including people and lifting many more boats. So that's, I think, the message. And I think it means taking, and I don't do this, I'm just as guilty as you. I'm the angry white liberal looking at Trump venting on my Twitter account, 23 hours a day. So I think we have to look at our local areas where we can make a difference, our neighborhoods, our communities, get involved and push on a joint agenda and say, look, we can make a city work for all of us. Will it be easy? No. But we can do it. We can turn that corner. And in the book, I lay out the plan. We need more affordable housing. We need more affordable rental housing. We need better schools in urban areas for everyone. We need a universal basic income. We need better jobs, especially those caring and service jobs, have to pay a living family supporting wage. But we did that for white working class men in factories. We can do it for women and minorities in service jobs if we have the will. So I lay out a plan, and I think this is the only way we're going to keep our country whole. If not, our country's going to go back to the kind of civil war with these two groups warring at one another. Yeah. And that's not feasible. So we've got to get our act together and do something that brings us together in our communities.
Yeah. And so in your opinion, as we kind of wrap up, I know your time is limited, and we do appreciate you. Do you think this race thing is insurmountable in a draft? I mean, it's clearly a huge, if not the underpinning of most of this stuff in many ways. Is it insurmountable, in your opinion, based on your experience, your work, your observations? Do you think it's really insurmountable?
So it's what shaped me as a boy. It was watching the ugliness and brutality of race in my city of Newark and not understanding it, and as a kid, fighting with my uncles, my Italian uncles, about how they could have these beliefs, wanting to study it and understand it. And I think I was naive, Glenn. I think I thought it was going away, but it was under the rug. It wasn't going away. My cousin, who still lives in Bloomfield, he's 75 years old. He was a poverty worker. He was on the barricades in the civil rights movement. He said when he goes to his barbershop now outside of Bloomfield, he hears it. He didn't hear it for 20 years, but now he hears it. Yeah. So I think I was naive, to be quite honest. I think I thought we were growing into this more. And Obama, president, could you believe, jubilation? We had a party in Toronto where we live. We had all of Toronto partying for Obama's election.
But let me say this to you.
And go ahead. So I think the backlash has reaffirmed an ugly side of America. And yes, I do think it can go away, but it's going to take a lot of hard work.
Well, here's my skepticism is based on, as you laid out your background. Mine is growing up in Birmingham in the 60s, right?
Yep.
In segregation. And my mother went to segregated high schools, as I did, as I drank out of colored water fountains and all of that stuff, and went to doctors who had colored exam rooms and colored waiting rooms. And so all of that's my experience. So I wasn't surprised. Trump is not a new appearance for me. We've experienced the character. He's just the latest iteration of that character, in my opinion. Yep. And one of the reasons I gravitate so much to your work is because it is so accessible for solutions, because at the end of the day, our victories with the civil rights movement were based on what we did in Birmingham that resonated, and what we did in Selma, and what we did in Little Rock, and all, so it's really at the municipal level. See, I can determine, I want to know who are the people that's going to make sure my streets are paved. I'm sorry, go on.
One other thing I would add, when I look at the creative class, why I developed that, not based on education level, but based on creative output. If you look at the history of creativity in America, one lens is the white Anglo-Saxon or whatever inventor like a Jobs or a Gates. The other lens is Louis Armstrong, Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Jimi Hendrix, the people who I loved as a boy. So we have a society in which a lot of our creativity came from the black community and came from the bottom up. So you take those two threads together and you put them together and you say, how does America survive? It only can survive by overcoming this. And it's been a long struggle, I mean, since the Civil War. But I have to think that if we keep struggling and keep fighting, we can push against it. But, you know, I can tell you, when I live in Toronto half the year, Toronto's a very different place than America. And when you come to a place that doesn't have that legacy of race and segregation, it is a different kind of place. It has its own issues with race, don't get me wrong. Every place has an issue with race, but it is a very different kind of society.
Okay, I got you. Well, and so you're saying keep hope alive.
Yeah, and I think I think you said it though. Birmingham, Selma, Little Rock, especially today. I don't think we're going to change this divided country. I think our best work is going to be at our local level, our local cities, making the changes that can benefit and pay off to people in their neighborhoods, and making sure that we get beyond this tale of two cities. And that's where I think the politicians can grasp it. A politician who's a local mayor or a local council person can grasp the fact that we can no longer go down this road of a tale of two cities. I think the national level, given what I see there, is a much harder nut to crack. And
that's what I got out of your book, and I really think that because we can hold accountability and we can have standards for those people who are local school boards and local city council, the local mayor. Those people are right. That I think it does us a disservice when we redirect too much, disproportionately, our energy and attention to what's happening at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. If we focused on our concerted energies being applied to who's representing us, driving policies, what we expect, and how that, I think we would see a lot of these problems resolved and start to at least turn around. And our allies are there. I think when you look at who are the more liberal, small L, progressive people of all races, the people who want to see positive change, who want to build on the legacy of the struggles of the 60s and the Obama victory, they're urbanites. They're not suburbanites. So you have more natural allies and a more natural coalition at the local city level than you do trying at the state legislature, which is kind of a backwater. I think that's where the natural coalition and allies in this struggle across races, across classes, across ethnicities lie. So that's where I would say we work at the local level and neighborhood level, and we put people on the hook and we tell them they've got to move towards a more inclusive prosperity if we want a great city and grow and be inventive and strong and create good jobs for everybody. And I just think that you're hitting the nail on the head. I just see that the ripple effect is just what happens to the quality of life and the social determinants for the wider community and those people who are basically marginalized, looking at these health indicators, looking at the educational attainment. I think I was somewhere in the mid 40% range is where they measure the high school graduation rates here in Philadelphia. And that's done over a 6-year period. The 4 years are so low, they have to do it over 6 years. And so, but when you look, we got 128 colleges and universities in the Philadelphia region, and those who graduate couldn't even probably qualify to pass the admission test to get into any of those universities. So we got to start to really address this on a local level, and really I think our energies are best suited there.
Yeah, and I just want to say that it's not going to be easy. We are now at a point with Trump in office, with the Republicans in control of both houses of Congress, with the Republicans in the control of a majority of state legislatures across this country. We're in a low point. But then people say, well, Florida, you went from upbeat to gloomy. I'm not gloomy. I'm actually upbeat because I do think this process of people moving back to cities, wanting to be more in diverse environments, understanding that the local level is a better, more reasonable level to put political action. I'm optimistic that over the next 10 to 15 years we can start to turn this around. But we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to start to do it because what's happened in the interim is very distressing.
You keep talking about Trump. Is he does he hold an office? What is he? Is he? You mean the Trump from the hotel guy?
Yeah, exactly.
What's
exactly?
Wait, but he didn't win, did he?
No, we just woke up from a nightmare.
I was going to say, man, you scared.
just woke up from a nightmare.
You scared me for a minute there, Doc.
Yeah.
So anyway,
and hopefully he won't be in office too much longer, but But I think that's what we got to do. We've got to. The only way we're going to build a really inclusive nation is to start at these cities and urban areas like Philadelphia, like Detroit, and all over the country. And it's going to be and make sure. And the other part of it is the cities don't have the power they need. Much of the power is with the feds. Much of the power is with the states. And I understand that cities have done a bunch of things wrong. But a city like Philadelphia or New York or Detroit gives more money to the federal government back in taxes than it gets. All that money that they pay go to the Sun Belt states and the rural areas. So I think giving cities and their leadership more power to invest in their own future, to build whatever it is, better schools or better parks or better neighborhoods or better transit, I think if we can get power more local and neighborhood-based, that would help a lot, to go a long way to beginning to put us on the right path.
I absolutely love it.
You're listening to Information is the Best Medicine. Glenn Ellis brings you what you need to know to be healthy. He's not a doctor. He just sounds like one. Now let's get back to more good health talk with Glenn Ellis and his guest on Information is the Best Medicine.
I'm going to respect your time and your generosity with it by joining us this morning. Dr. Richard Florida has been our guest this morning, one of the world's leading urbanists. And I know what it means now. I know what an urbanist is. He's a researcher, professor, a writer, and a journalist. And we thank him. He's joined us and talked about his most recent book, The New Urban Crisis: How Our Cities Are Increasing Inequality, Deepening Segregation, and Failing the Middle Class, and what we can do about it. We thank you for joining us. Dr. Florida, before you go, unfortunately, I must share with you that we do something. We got a little ritual here that we ask our guests. Actually, we don't even ask. I don't think you have much of an option now. Before you go, I need you to raise your right hand.
Yeah.
I need you to solemnly swear or affirm that you're going to come back and join us again.
I will. I swear. I will. And I want to thank you for having me on. I want to thank you for asking me tough questions about the reality of our nation, about race and class and place, and for pushing me, as well as the rest of our society, to do what's necessary, because I think it's only by this kind of constructive dialogue and by a mutual back and forth and by you pushing and me pushing back that we're going to get to a better society. So I want to thank you for having me on and being such a great host and a great, I would say, constructive critic of my ideas. I appreciate that.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. That's kind of you. And as I said when we started the interview, the discussion rather, and conversation, it's important that people like you are able to talk to people like me and the listeners of this program, because you have the expertise and the information that's critical for our empowerment on how we can be proactive and engaged in shaping our own destinies.
Oh, thank you very much. Pleasure being with you.
All the best to you and your family, and enjoy those two little girls.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye-bye.
Take care. You have been listening to another broadcast of our wonderful, I think it's wonderful. This has been a plum-pleasing pleasure, as Les Brown would say. I'm Glenn Ellis, and we've just had a great conversation with Dr. Richard Florida, and just talking about gentrification and how the components of gentrification, which is the influx of this young, affluent, well-educated, well-skilled, and highly technologically trained, white, mostly, group of people, and what the impact of the success of that has done to the rest of us. And according to Dr. Florida, that has resulted in an increase in segregation, an increase in inequality, and a increasingly failing middle class. But there are things we can do, and we got to keep it local, and we got to stay focused, and we got to keep our foot on the gas. Until the next time, this has been Glenn Ellis, and I want you to make sure you don't carry nothing that might be a load. Just ease on down the road. take good care of yourselves, and live the best life possible.
You've been listening to a podcast of Information is the Best Medicine with Glenn Ellis, Saturdays at 9 a.m. exclusively on WURD Radio, 96.1 FM and 900 AM WURD.